Why did only 1 in every 5 members of FLAK crews survive World War II? How did an anti-aircraft cannon, originally designed to shoot down planes, become one of the most feared tank killers in history? How did it bring down hundreds of Allied bombers? And why was its targeting system so advanced that it felt decades ahead of its time? You are about to hear the full, intense story of the weapon that became legendary on every front of the war, the infamous German 88. Let's begin. In the early 1930s, Germany was secretly rebuilding its military might at an astonishing pace despite the strict restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. That treaty specifically banned Germany from developing tanks, aircraft, heavy artillery, and many other modern weapons. But behind closed doors, under layers of secrecy and cover companies, German engineers and military planners were quietly violating every rule. They were preparing for a future war, one that they believed was inevitable. World War I had proven that aircraft were no longer just tools for reconnaissance. They were the future of warfare. By the 1930s, aviation technology had advanced rapidly, and new bombers were capable of flying higher and faster than ever before. These aircraft could soar far above the range of ordinary anti-aircraft guns and drop bombs powerful enough to flatten entire city blocks. The German High Command realized that the next war would be fought not only on the ground but also in the skies, and they needed a weapon capable of protecting their cities and armies from this growing aerial threat. Engineers at the famous Krupp Company were given the monumental task of creating a new kind of cannon. It had to fire shells at extremely high velocity, reach high altitudes, and deliver enough explosive power to destroy heavily built bombers. The task was challenging and required several years of design, testing, and improvement. But after countless trials, the engineers finally produced what would soon become one of the deadliest and most iconic weapons of the 20th century, the 8.8mm FLAK. 18. The term FLAK was an abbreviation of the German word Flugabwehrkanone, which literally meant air defense cannon. Over time, the name stuck. Even today, people still use the word FLAK to describe criticism or heavy opposition, a linguistic echo of the terrifying anti-aircraft fire that once filled the skies of Europe. The FLAK-18 was a technological marvel for its time. It was built to fire high-velocity shells equipped with time fuses. These fuses could be adjusted so the shells would explode at a specific altitude, filling the sky with deadly fragments of steel. A direct hit could rip an aircraft apart in an instant, while even a near miss could tear through wings, engines, and fuselages, sending bombers crashing to the ground. Its power and precision made it a nightmare for Allied pilots. The gun's advanced cruciform carriage allowed it to rotate and elevate quickly, making it capable of tracking fast-moving targets across the sky. It could elevate from 3 degrees to 85 degrees, which meant it could be used against ground targets as well. This flexibility would soon reveal the 88's unexpected second life as a devastating anti-tank and ground support weapon. Weighing around 7 tons and requiring a crew of 10 men to operate efficiently, the gun was heavy, but still mobile. It could be towed by trucks or half-tracks, making it perfect for Germany's fast-moving blitzkrieg tactics. A well-trained crew could set it up for combat in minutes, turning a quiet field into a deadly fortress of firepower. However, as the war dragged on and German casualties mounted, the composition of these crews began to change. The once well-trained professionals were gradually replaced by old men, wounded veterans, teenage boys, and even women who often worked in communication and radar detection roles. By the middle of the war, more than 1.2 million people were serving in Germany's anti-aircraft units, nearly half the strength of the entire Luftwaffe. These units became one of the largest and most essential branches of the German military effort, defending cities, factories, and troops from relentless Allied bombing campaigns. What made the FLAK-18 truly exceptional was not only its destructive power, but the brilliant system that supported it. Everything surrounding the gun, from its ammunition and optics to its fire control instruments, was designed for maximum effectiveness. The Germans had unknowingly created what would later be called one of the most versatile and effective weapons of the entire Second World War. It was reliable, adaptable, and deadly accurate. Its impact would be felt across every theater of the conflict. The gun's first real test came even before World War II began. During the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s, Germany sent a small expeditionary force to assist General Franco's nationalists. Among the equipment they brought were several 88mm flak guns. The results were astonishing. Not only did the gun prove to be a highly effective anti-aircraft weapon, but it also demonstrated terrifying efficiency against ground targets. It destroyed bunkers, machine gun nests, and most importantly, enemy tanks. At the time, tanks were still lightly armored, designed mainly to resist small arms fire and light artillery. Against the high-velocity shells of the 88, they had no chance. This unexpected success in Spain showed that the weapon could do far more than it had been designed for. It could destroy anything on the battlefield. By the time World War II officially began in 1939, Germany had around 2,600 of these flak guns in service, more than twice as many as Britain, and far more than the United States, which had barely started developing similar weapons. The German High Command's foresight had paid off. They knew the importance of such a weapon long before their enemies did. As the war expanded, and the Luftwaffe became stretched across multiple fronts, production of the 88 increased dramatically. Engineers continued to improve the design, creating upgraded versions like the FLAK 36 and FLAK 37, each one more efficient and deadly than the last. By the end of the war, Germany had produced around 21,000 of these guns in various forms. They were used not just for defending cities and airfields, but also as powerful anti-tank weapons on the front lines. Allied soldiers came to dread the distinct crack of the 88, a sound that meant death could come from miles away. The weapon became a symbol of German engineering brilliance and military precision, respected, feared, and hated all at once. It dominated the skies, shattered tank formations, and carved its name into history as one of the most legendary guns ever built. But their crews would pay a steep price for manning such a weapon. Every time the 88 roared to life, the men behind it risked everything. They worked in open fields or on rooftops, exposed to strafing aircraft, artillery shells, and counter-bombardments. The moment an 88 battery opened fire, it revealed its position to enemy pilots, who were more than eager to silence it. Many of these brave soldiers never had the chance to fire more than a few rounds before their positions were obliterated by return fire. Yet, despite this terrifying reality, the crews continued to fight with unwavering determination. The Germans refined the design of the 88 again and again as the war intensified. The next version, the FLAK 36, introduced a more efficient multi-section barrel that could be replaced quickly once it wore out, allowing for continuous use on the battlefield without lengthy repairs. It also came with a new cruciform carriage, known as the Luftwaffe 36, which allowed faster deployment and made the gun easier to reposition when moving from one firing position to another. To protect the men who operated it, a large steel shield was added to the front, offering at least minimal defense against small arms fire and flying shrapnel. Other smaller ergonomic improvements were made to make the weapon easier and safer to use under the stress of combat. The engineers extended the barrel and introduced a new shell with a longer propellant case, which increased the muzzle velocity even further. The result was a weapon that could fire its deadly rounds faster, farther, and with more destructive force than ever before. It was soon followed by another upgraded model, the FLAK 37, which came with advanced targeting instruments and, most importantly, a revolutionary fire control data transmission system. This allowed the gun to receive targeting coordinates directly from a central command post. It meant that instead of relying on individual crews to aim and calculate independently, multiple guns could now work in perfect coordination, all directed by a single fire control team. This was cutting-edge technology for its time. The fire control system worked as a mechanical analog computer that processed data from rangefinders, acoustic detection devices, and later even radar equipment. It automatically calculated where an enemy plane would be in the next few seconds, taking into account its altitude, speed, and direction. The command crew would then transmit the data to all the guns in the battery, synchronizing their aim to fire at the predicted interception point. It was an extraordinary example of early mechanical computing, and its precision was astonishing. Hitting a moving aircraft thousands of feet above the ground required complex mathematical calculations. A shell fired from an 88 often took 15 to 20 seconds to reach its target, meaning gunners had to predict exactly where the plane would be at that moment. Even a small miscalculation could send the shell exploding harmlessly in empty sky. This system gave the German anti-aircraft batteries a terrifying efficiency that Allied pilots soon came to know all too well. While the Allies eventually developed time-proximity fuses, small, radar-based devices that automatically detonated shells when they neared a target, the Germans never managed to create an effective version of their own. As a result, they had to rely on time fuses throughout the war. These required precise manual setting before each shell was fired, which made the process slower and less accurate. Sometimes the shells exploded too early, far below the bombers, or too late, bursting harmlessly above them. Even so, the sheer volume of firepower that a single 88 battery could unleash meant that some shells inevitably found their mark. The skies over Germany were filled with black clouds of smoke as thousands of 88 shells detonated around incoming Allied formations. Pilots described it as flying through a storm of metal. The gunfire was so dense that many bombers returned home riddled with holes, engines destroyed, and crews wounded or killed. Still, as the war went on, the effectiveness of the FLAK began to decline. The Allies adapted by introducing radar jammers and developing tactics to confuse enemy targeting. They flew at higher altitudes and in tighter formations, reducing their losses. Early in the war, it took roughly 4,000 shells to bring down a single bomber. By the later years, that number had grown to more than 16,000. Yet even with this reduced effectiveness, the FLAK remained a constant and deadly threat. For every bomber that survived, another was shot down or crippled beyond repair. Thousands of Allied airmen lost their lives in the fiery skies above Germany, and countless others were forced to bail out, only to be captured as prisoners of war. The 88's accuracy, power, and reach made it one of the deadliest defensive weapons ever created, and Allied crews feared it more than almost anything else. But the FLAK crews themselves lived under the same deadly conditions they imposed on their enemies. The Allies knew the danger these guns represented and targeted them relentlessly. Bombing raids often included secondary attacks on FLAK positions. Pilots would swoop down to strafe gun crews, or heavy bombers would plaster entire defensive belts with high explosives before attacking their main targets. To serve in an 88 battery was to live a life measured in minutes of survival. Many crews never saw the end of a single mission. The 88 itself, however, continued to prove its worth in both the air and on the ground. Its muzzle velocity of around 2,700 feet per second and an effective ceiling of about 26,000 feet made it capable of reaching nearly every Allied bomber in service. Its long barrel provided a flat trajectory, making it astonishingly accurate even at extreme ranges. On the ground, this meant it could hit moving targets with terrifying precision. Its semi-automatic breech system allowed a trained crew to fire up to 20 rounds per minute. After each shot, the gun automatically ejected the empty casing, and the moment a new shell was inserted, the weapon was ready to fire again without delay. The 88mm shells were small miracles of engineering, each weighing just under 10 kilograms, packed with roughly 1 kilogram of high explosive. When a shell detonated, it fragmented into tens of thousands of razor-sharp steel shards that tore through the air at immense speeds. Each explosion created a lethal zone nearly 15 meters wide, and bombers flying through these clouds of shrapnel were torn apart. The aluminum skin of the planes offered almost no protection. Fuel tanks ignited, engines shattered, and pilots were killed instantly by fragments that pierced cockpits and control panels. Later in the war, even heavier FLAK guns were introduced, such as the 10.5 cm and 12.8 cm models. These monsters fired shells weighing up to 26 kilograms, containing 2 or 3 times as much explosive material as the original 88 rounds. They were fewer in number, but caused catastrophic damage wherever they were used. The thunderous roar of these guns could be heard for miles, and their explosions lit up the night sky with flashes of orange fire. Still, despite the arrival of these newer models, the 88 remained the heart of Germany's air defense. It was the most versatile, reliable, and feared gun of the entire war, yet its story was far from over. For as much as it dominated the skies, its most famous and unexpected role was still to come. At the very start of the war, Germany's air superiority left many anti-aircraft crews with little to do. The Luftwaffe controlled the skies, and the bombers they had prepared to fight rarely appeared. But when the German army began clashing with heavily armored French and British tanks, a new problem emerged. The standard German anti-tank guns like the 37mm and 50mm were useless against the thick armor of the French Char B1 and the British Matilda II. Shells simply bounced off without leaving a mark. Commanders quickly realized that only the mighty 88 had enough power to pierce such defenses. In desperation, they ordered the FLAK batteries to lower their barrels and engage the tanks head-on. The results were immediate and shocking. The 88 obliterated the enemy armor with a single shot, punching straight through and igniting the tanks from within. Soldiers on both sides witnessed the terrifying effectiveness of this new use for the gun. What had started as an anti-aircraft weapon was now proving to be one of the deadliest anti-tank weapons ever made. And as the war expanded into Africa and the Eastern Front, this dual purpose would make the 88 a legend. The Battle of Arras in North Africa truly revealed the terrifying potential of the German 88mm guns against enemy armor. During this unexpected clash, British forces launched a powerful armored counterattack against Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. The British tanks pushed with incredible speed and force, catching the Germans off guard. Rommel's lighter Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks were no match for the heavily armored British Matildas, whose thick armor shrugged off the smaller German anti-tank rounds. The situation was rapidly collapsing. German lines were faltering, and their defensive positions were on the verge of being completely overrun. It was in this desperate moment that Rommel, known for his bold and decisive thinking, made a fateful decision. He ordered all available 88mm guns, originally deployed as anti-aircraft weapons, to lower their barrels and open fire directly at the advancing British tanks. What followed was nothing short of devastating. The 88s unleashed a storm of fire and steel across the battlefield. The armor-piercing shells screamed through the desert air and tore through British tanks with horrifying precision. The explosions were thunderous, and one by one the Matildas were obliterated, burning fiercely in the desert heat. Within minutes, the British counterattack was halted in its tracks. The 88s had saved the German position, and the world had just witnessed the birth of one of the most feared weapons of World War II. From that moment onward, German commanders began to see the 88 not just as an anti-aircraft gun, but as a deadly multi-purpose weapon capable of destroying even the heaviest armored vehicles. The weapon's exceptional muzzle velocity, superb optics and flat firing trajectory made it ideal for long-range engagements in open terrain. In the North African deserts, where visibility stretched for miles, the 88 became a nightmare for Allied tank crews. German gunners, skilled and efficient, could pick off targets from astonishing distances before the enemy could even detect where the fire was coming from. The psychological effect was equally powerful. The very sound of an 88 opening fire sent shivers through Allied ranks. German engineers quickly began developing new ammunition specifically designed for tank combat. The Panzergranate 39 and Panzergranate 40 were armor-piercing rounds that featured explosive fillers, causing catastrophic internal damage once they penetrated a tank's armor. With these shells, the 88 could pierce up to 100 millimeters of armor from 2 kilometers away, giving German forces a massive advantage on the battlefield. However, as the war progressed and Germany turned eastward to invade the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht faced an unexpected challenge. The Soviets fielded new heavily armored tanks like the T-34 and KV-1, which could withstand direct hits from most of the German anti-tank weapons then in use. For the first time, German crews experienced the same helplessness their enemies had felt in Africa. Their shells simply bounced off Soviet armor. Once again, the 88 was called into action. Wherever these Soviet beasts appeared, German commanders ordered the 88s into position. The gun's immense power was often the only thing capable of stopping the advancing Soviet armor. On countless Eastern Front battlefields, these guns turned the tide of engagements, destroying T-34s and KV tanks that threatened to break through German lines. The weapon's accuracy and power earned it legendary status among soldiers, but it came at a terrible cost. The crews manning the 88s were often exposed and became priority targets for enemy artillery, tanks, snipers, and aircraft. The moment an 88 opened fire, it revealed its position, and enemy forces would unleash everything they had to silence it. Casualties were staggering, and many crews didn't survive more than a few battles. Realizing the need to protect these valuable weapons and their crews, German engineers began mounting the 88 onto mobile armored platforms. This innovation gave rise to one of the most iconic tanks in history, the Tiger I. Entering service in late 1942, the Tiger's 88mm gun became a symbol of terror across every front. Its accuracy, penetration power, and range were unmatched. Allied tankers quickly learned to fear the Tiger. Some reported being destroyed from over 2 kilometers away, often without ever seeing where the shot came from. Even the thick armor of British Churchills and American Shermans offered little protection against it. Alongside the Tiger came powerful tank destroyers, like the Nashorn and the Elephant, both armed with upgraded versions of the 88, such as the Pak-43. These vehicles, though sometimes unreliable mechanically, carried guns that were masterpieces of engineering, deadly accurate, devastatingly powerful, and capable of destroying any Allied tank in existence. The 88's dominance on the battlefield became so complete that it was regarded by many as the best all-around gun of the entire war. But while it ruled on land, the skies above Germany were becoming a different kind of battlefield altogether. By 1943, the Allied air forces had gained overwhelming control of the skies. They began a relentless bombing campaign that targeted not only military factories and industrial centers, but also cities, railways, and civilian populations. Germany's flak crews, many of them young recruits or older men, were forced to defend their skies against thousands of Allied bombers day and night. Positioned around key industrial areas, they had to remain constantly alert, sleeping beside their guns and waiting for the next siren to sound. The strain was immense and the danger was constant. As Allied tactics evolved, flak batteries came under direct and deadly attack. Fighter bombers carried out low-altitude strafing runs, tearing apart gun positions with machine gun fire. Bombers began using time-fused cluster munitions, small bombs that exploded above suspected flak sites, shredding crews and equipment with thousands of high-speed fragments. Casualty rates among flak crews soared. By the middle of the war, it was estimated that between half and two-thirds of all flak personnel were either killed or wounded, and in the final months of the war, those numbers climbed even higher. Many crews fought and died where they stood, often without adequate cover or reinforcements. Despite the odds, they continued to fire, determined to defend their homeland until the end. In Germany's major cities, a more fortified solution was developed: the flak towers. These massive structures combined heavy anti-aircraft defenses with thick concrete fortifications and large underground shelters for civilians. Built in Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna, each flak tower was a fortress in its own right, with concrete walls up to 3 meters thick and capable of withstanding direct hits from 500-kilogram bombs. Inside they housed hospitals, supply depots, living quarters, and command centers. The towers bristled with weapons, including quadruple-mounted 128mm cannons, several 88s, and smaller 37 and 20mm automatic guns for defense against low-flying aircraft. From their platforms, the guns could unleash a wall of fire that filled the skies with deadly shrapnel. Civilians took shelter in the lower levels as the upper floors thundered from constant firing. These towers became symbols of German endurance and engineering might, fortresses that stood defiant even as the rest of the country fell to ruin. Yet their strategic impact was limited. There were too few of them to make a decisive difference, and Allied bombers simply adjusted their routes to avoid flying directly over them. As Germany's defeat became inevitable, these towers became last-stand fortresses. Their crews continued to fight until the very end, refusing to surrender until the war was lost beyond hope. Today, many of these flak towers still stand, their massive concrete shells serving as haunting reminders of a time when the air was filled with the roar of engines and the thunder of 88s. Some have been turned into museums, where visitors can walk through their cold, echoing chambers and imagine the chaos that once filled them, the deafening blasts, the trembling walls, and the desperate men who fought to defend the skies with one of the most formidable weapons ever created.